Hello, I hope you guys have been having a good week. I haven't gotten an awful lot of emails about last week's module, so I'm hoping that means that all of you understand everything absolutely perfectly. You could write a book about it if you needed to. But Dadaism and Surrealism and Cubism, we can still see that it's heavily impacting today, and advertising, from advertising to cartoons and a lot of other stuff in between. If you folks do have questions, please feel free to email me and let me know right away. If you're starting to feel overwhelmed as we're going into the last quarter of the semester, let me know as soon as you can, and uh, contact the Office of Student Accommodations and see how they can help you. A lot of the times they can get the help that you need to take a little bit of the pressure off. I know that most of you are working really hard, both on your schoolwork and in your home life. And this is meant to be a class where you learn something and you enjoy yourself, not to be a stressor. So let me know what I can do that might be able to help. Now, this week, this module, we're going to be talking about abstraction. And like last week, we talked about the difference between art periods and movements. Remember the three principal areas that they're different is time period, geography, and ideas, where a period will last 50 years to several hundred years, and an art movement will last 10 to 20 years, maybe 50 years at the most. An art period will be in like a country or region of the world, and an art movement will be uh, just artists that interact with each other or share a style or share ideas because intellectually they're linked, not because of geography. And the third is an art period deals with the things that are important within the culture that encompasses the art period, or to the society that shelters the art period. And with an art movement, the ideas that are dealt with are reactions to things that are going on, or intellectual constructs or pathways that the artists involved share and want to deal with. Now, this, what we're talking about this week, is another art movement at about the same time period called abstraction. And we're going to be talking about a couple different things that deal with this. What is abstraction? How is it considered as an art movement? What are the parameters of that movement? And doing your own thing as an art abstraction. And I did a little slideshow. There's not an awful lot of slides, but I wanted to run through it where I kind of give an idea or share an idea of how abstraction looks when it's practiced, when it's implemented. So I'm going to do the little magic techno thing and share my screen if I can. Let's see. Give me just about 3 days or so, and we'll do it really quickly. Almost there. All right. Hopefully you guys can see this, these slides. And I'm going to start it from the beginning. What I want to do is show abstraction through different images of trees and how people paint trees. Now, this is fairly naturalistic. We can tell that it's a tree pretty readily. I don't know if you can see my mouse. I'm looking on the left-hand side. We see some branches of another tree next to it. This tree in the middle, we have some green leaves at the bottom and dots throughout it. There's a lot of orange and yellow, so it's probably an autumn image. We have branches that look fairly naturalistic. We have reflective water in the background, as well as faded out reflected trees as well. So, but this, it reads pretty simply, pretty easily as a tree. Here, these are trees as well. This is from the American school or movement called Hudson River School, where, as you could tell, the landscape was pretty romanticized. So yes, these are still trees. We can see them as trees. They're very easy to read as trees. They're kind of faded and out of focus just a little bit. So it looks like it is an ideal day to be looking at the scene across the valley. So it's rather idealized, but they're still very heavily naturalistic. As we go into the next one, the tree that's a central feature, you can see that things are starting to be abstracted a little bit. By that we mean that elements are simplified somewhat and they're stylized. See these branches, they curve in very even, very smooth curves for the most part. The leaves on the tree, even though they vary in color a little bit, most of them are green, some of them are blue, and then there's a few turquoise, but they're all almost identical. And unlike a natural tree that we'd be looking at out a window, these leaves all face fully towards us. You can see most of the flowers on this tree face fully towards us. We can see all the petals. Around the periphery, we see that's my largest dog whining. She's bored and she thinks I'm not paying attention to her, which I'm not. Then we see these on around the side. We see flowers that are on their side, very perfectly on their side. We see several birds throughout, which are either in perfect profile or they're in profile with their heads turned. But even though we can identify these things and we know what they are through the simplified imagery, where this is not naturalistic, but like I said, it's simplified and it's even idealized a little bit. But we have these symbols that replace the naturalistic leaf, the naturalistic flower, and the naturalistic bird. But we're starting to get into abstraction here. We look at this. This is a state flag of New Hampshire, I believe. In this field of white, there is the tree of liberty, and we can see it. We know it's a tree because of our familiarity with profiles of evergreens, I think. We see this roughly triangular cascading canopy. We see the vertical line of the trunk. We see this root ball as it bulges up out of the ground underneath. The color is very flat, unlike when we look out a window and you see a real tree. The color is never just one solid color. And even though the variation in the edges feels organic somewhat, this is still not a completely naturalistic tree. It's become very stylized and simplified. And it's become, again, it's a little bit more abstracted. Now here we go even several steps further. This is Japanese kanji for tree. And we can see the tree in here. It's not just a random symbol. Here's the vertical line of the trunk. We have these diagonal lines that are that diagonal tree canopy like we saw in the state flag of New Hampshire, very simplified. And we have this horizontal line going across close to the top, which represents the horizon. And so we see this, we can kind of see the shapes of a tree. We can see where it kind of gets its inspiration from a physical tree. But this is so stylized that it's very unless you know it's a tree, it's very difficult to see the tree. And this is an example of further abstraction, which again is stylizing, symbolizing, and simplifying something. And here we go even further. This is a painting from a friend of mine, where we have it's actually a landscape. But here, the trees are these long green shapes on the right-hand side, very tall green shapes. They represent poplar trees, and the only reason we know that they're trees is because of the shapes of green, the vertical shapes of green. You squint your eyes a little bit, you can kind of see the poplar tree in it. But this is an example of further abstraction. In the kanji, we could still see a little bit of echoes, a little bit of inspiration of the tree. Here, the only thing that gives it that relationship to a tree is the color and maybe the broad shape of the strokes of paint. Now, this is just way out. I mean, who knows where the tree is on this? If you guessed the blue square, you'd be right. This is actually a landscape by an abstract painter named Mondrian, Pete Mondrian. At the time that he was living, around 1910, the world, as we talked about, had become so fast paced and so ridiculously complicated that he longed to represent things in a very simplified manner to kind of slow things down. And what he decided to do was take shapes and lines that he saw in the landscape and simplify them until he had only vertical and horizontal lines, used mostly a field of white, and then used primary colors plus green. And this, we can, maybe there's a horizon line, that middle line going along from left to right. Maybe that's a cloud from left to right towards the top. Maybe the vertical lines represent poles or pathways or things like that that are just continued forward. The only spot of color seems to represent the tree. Now, sorry for those of you who can see me, I was gripping my nose trying not to sneeze. Now, these 6 paintings are a sequence that are all done by Pete Mondrian. You can tell that the left-hand top, it's pretty obvious that this is a tree. It's done in the Impressionist style that we're very familiar with. Dots of color. The colors, the natural world colors are accentuated a little bit or changed a little bit or exaggerated a little bit. Some of the lines we still feel a little bit of organic nature there to those lines, a little bit of organic feel. Now in the middle top, and I think you can say make the argument that the Impressionist style is starting to abstract the tree a little bit. This is not a tree that you would normally see on any given day. We can recognize it as a tree, but the colors are a little bit strange. The visual texture is a little bit strange. So it's been abstracted. The middle top, you can see that he's done that. You see a lot of the same lines of the tree. You see the curving, the curvilinear lines, that's what they're called, but that are symbolize the trunk and the branches. But the colors here are grayscale. So he's not necessarily making a black and white painting um, to make a black and white painting, but he's trying to simplify the colors down until you just see the shades. And it happens to be black and white. To the right of that, we see the lines are emphasized until we no longer really see a lot of the tree in there. I mean, you can see a little bit of the tree because we know it's a tree. And then most of these are kind of tan colors with some blues and pinks, but they're all very pale versions or of tan. The bottom left, we get the colors are even more exaggerated, and here the trunk lines and the branch lines have been simplified until they're just horizontal and vertical. The colors are even further from what we would see in an ordinary tree. The middle bottom, we see those colors are simplified still, down even further. It looks like there's 4 or 5 colors. White, 2 shades of taupe, very pale blue, and kind of a yellow. And we see that the lines have been simplified even more. They're still only horizontal and vertical, but there's fewer of them. And the bottom of the right, yes, it's the same tree, but Mondrian has simplified it so much that there's, unless you come to it knowing that it's a tree, it's almost impossible to tell what it is. And this is true for far abstraction. And it's just horizontal vertical lines, got orange and or red, got orange or yellow, maybe a light gray, a white, and a black. But you can see how much that tree has been abstracted into something that we can hardly even recognize anymore. I am trying to get out of the slideshow. There we go. All right. So you can see just from that simple little exercise, he's painting the same tree, but he's getting progressively more and more abstract. And Pete Mondrian, even though we may not even recognize it as art, a lot of us, what he's trying to communicate is not necessarily the fact of a tree or the fact of a landscape. What he's trying to communicate is his impression, his need for calm and order and simplifying the landscape around him and trying to communicate that to whoever views the painting. And that's why he did horizontal, vertical lines, very open shapes, and very little color, or very solid color in some areas. Another artist that we need to look at is a gentleman named Wassily Kandinsky. He was about the same time. Both of these guys started in the typical stuff at the time, which was realism, romanticism, and the impressionism, like we talked about a couple weeks ago. But Wassily Kandinsky, he was more, instead of simplifying things with black and white horizontal and vertical lines, like his um, friend Pete Mondrian did, what he did was start just working with the colors. He started singling out colors that were used in paint and imagery. And instead of expressing a naturalist landscape, he would just respond to the emotions that the colors evoked in him that he saw. Some of them he would uh, amplify, some of them he would dull down, some of them he would move completely, and he would add other ones, trying to express somehow, instead of a simplified landscape, he was expressing how he felt, trying to do it in a way without recognizable themes so that you wouldn't see a car or a bird in his later paintings. You wouldn't see anything that you'd recognize. All you'd see would be texture and fields or swoops of color. And so it's, I don't know, I think it's kind of interesting when we look at music, and tonal music is designed to share imagery or narrative or feelings without anything concrete that you can identify. And what these painters were doing with the abstraction movement was to try to do the same type of thing with paint. You can think of, I'm not talking about music with lyrics, I'm talking about like background music or music in the back of movie scenes and things like that kind of underlie the narrative that the makers of the movie are trying to move forward. This is the kind of painting that we're looking at, where people are trying to get something, a feeling akin to music in a realm where we could actually see it with our physical eyes. And I can imagine how difficult that is, because you can't show, if your restriction is you're trying to communicate the idea of a tree without a symbol that identifies it as a tree, it's going to be very difficult. And these guys, it's astounding to me what they were trying to do. If you think of the time that they were in, everybody's expecting this impressionist style or this romantic style of painting. It's pretty naturalistic, and to have these guys go off the deep end like that, I imagine it was very difficult for them at the beginning for people to even accept their work as art. Probably a lot like the Dadaists. Now, a third artist, well, the narrative for Western art history perspective on abstraction as a movement has Mondrian and Kandinsky as being kind of the founders of the movement right around 1910. And it's a reaction to naturalistic expectations of naturalist art. They wanted to communicate things that were not limited to recognizable imagery. And I don't think that narrative, that idea that started in 1910, can be really accurate because of another artist we're going to look at a little bit. Her name is Hilma af Klint. She was born in 1862, I believe, and she was she painted romantic images. She also worked quite a bit in impressionism. But in addition to making a living as painting expected themes, she did a secret body of work where she dealt with shapes and raw color, expressing energies and movement without identifiable things in her paintings. And she did this 20, 30 years before 1910. And from looking at some of the Wassily Kandinsky's paintings, if you look at both uh, Hilma af Klint's work that's in the module, and then you go online and do a search for Wassily Kandinsky, um, just some of his uh, later paintings, yeah, I think you can see a lot of similarity between what she was doing years earlier and what he was doing. And some art historians have suggested that there's a good chance Wassily Kandinsky knew of her work, had seen her work, and her work inspired him in a lot of stuff that he was doing. The stuff that I think is so amazing about Hilma's work is, well, she did a lot of things that were just gigantic, huge paintings, but she also did a lot of stuff that was really daring. Particularly for a woman who is known to make her living as a romantic painter and as an impressionist painter. So she did a lot of works that just seemed to come out of nowhere. And I wonder if that was why she hid them. And it wasn't until more than 100 years later that they were actually displayed. When you go to do your attendance and watch this video, there's also a second video, short video that I put on there about Hilma's work. You look at that and then respond to it in a sentence, you'll get extra credit. But I just think that she is an absolutely remarkable artist. Uh, Considering her as a product of her time, she was absolutely phenomenal. If you take her out of her time, she's still remarkable. One of the issues that I think is kind of funny is that with a lot of these art movements that we look at in the early 1900s, this kind of art school or art movement seems to be assumed to belong to the male, uh, particularly to the European male artist, even though we've seen that there are women that do remarkable things in these art schools or art movements as well. And the idea that abstraction, I can't remember the museum, it's in your, uh, I think it's Museum of Modern Art, but it's in your module. They talked about Pete Mondrian and Wassily Kandinsky as inventing abstraction. And these ideas, the idea that the male artist is most important, male European artist is most important, and that two male European artists are the ones who invented a movement is indicative of the idea that most of the time, whatever the identifiers that we have to kind of qualify ourselves are also there a lot of the times that help us feel safe and secure. And when this extends to a cultural level, then there's an assumption that members of that culture are the ones who are making the primary contributions. And this is called cultural centrism. I think it's important to know about this when we look at different art periods and art movements. It's particularly art periods, we can see that cultural centrism is very important to the people making the art. People that are making art in art periods are making art for their culture, their society, a specific geography, and a specific period of time. But they are doing that to kind of strengthen their own society. And so it's important to know that cultural centrism plays a part. When we look at history and we look at what we perceive to be history, we need to filter it through a perspective that cultural centrism plays a role. And so we need to sometimes go out of our way a little bit to find things that may not go fit in the mold correctly. And this is one of the reasons why we're looking at Pete Mondrian and Wassily Kandinsky, who seem to have invented abstraction as an art movement in that particular understanding of abstraction as part of a European progressive art. But I think it's also important to look at Hilma af Klint because of her works are so dramatic and amazing and very much abstraction, but also very much outside of that expectation of cultural centrism. And we look at it even, pull back a little bit even further. Abstraction, we talked about how it simplifies things, how it may symbolize things, how colors are altered and changed so that after a while, maybe the thing that's being expressed doesn't physically look at all like what it's supposed to represent. Or maybe the reason why we know what it represents is simply because of context. If we looked at those cave paintings that are 35,000 years old, you see some very naturalistic animals, and then you see some abstracted animals where colors are simplified to the point where they're only the colors that were the pigments that were available, long lasting pigments like black or red or yellow. Uh, Human figures may be simplified to the point where they are stick figures. Implements are simplified to the point where they express movement or a symbol as opposed to the actual naturalistic thing. And I think that's a really good example of what abstraction actually is. And that's 35,000 years old, which very much predates the abstraction movement. We can look at through even more recent history where paintings from our ancestors, like with the Egyptians, the wall paintings, you can see the naturalistic work on some of the genre scenes of daily farm life in a tomb, for example. And then when you switch over to an area where they're trying to communicate religious detail, that's when the human form becomes abstracted, where you see a full frontal eye, but you see it in a profile face, which is reminiscent of Cubism. You see the full, even though the people are walking to the side, where you're supposed to see the side view, you see the full frontal triangle of a human chest and very stylized hands and feet. Um, they're abstracting the human body to comply with a canon of expression that had religious significance. And then you look back to the earlier daily life in the farm scene on the same wall in an Egyptian tomb, and you see very naturalistic birds of people, for example. So even though abstraction is a specific art movement in 1910 to about 1930, and it reverberates continuing into today, abstraction can also be seen in what our ancestors have done throughout time, as imagery was taken from the naturalistic or photorealistic and distorted or simplified to express or underscore different ideas. And as you work with this, um, you're going to be writing a reflection piece about the artists that you learn in this module and about the different kinds of abstraction. And we can capitalize abstraction and make it an art movement that would be European. But we can also look at abstraction in the kente cloth, for example, that we looked at, in moko or traditional Maori tattooing. Abstraction is very prevalent where the designs are only one color on the skin, and those designs are usually very geometric, but they are used to communicate very specific things in a way different than language does. We look at the oceanic cultures that we looked at, same kind of thing. We look at the pottery, the work that we looked at the surrounding Sundiata and the Mali Kingdom. Those those figures are very abstracted as well for different reasons. So, like I said, we can look at abstraction two ways. One is that way of simplifying the outside world to underscore or communicate things different than uh, an accurate visual representation would. And then also, abstraction is a specific art movement in Europe starting in 1910 about. So, couple different things, but I want you to think about that and think about that in the reflection that you write. Now, for your studio work, this is going to be kind of an interesting thing. I'm experimenting with the peer review thing. I don't know if I've set it up right. If it if it seems not to work out, then we'll distribute those the points for that elsewhere for that assignment, but I want you guys to try it and see if we can get it to work. Let me know, email me and let me know what you think about it. But for this project, this studio project, what you're going to be doing is make a word list of the different emotions and come up with at least four. And you can draw from the examples given or come up with your own or any mix of the two of those two options. And the reason why we want to do emotions is that emotions, I think, it's a little bit more difficult to accurately communicate emotion with a photorealistic image. Now, you're going to make a list of four emotions. Then for each of those four emotions, I want you to draw three squares that are about 2 to 4 inches across. And in each of those three squares, you're going to do a thumbnail, just black and white with pencil or pen. And you can do texture or whatever you want, but those three thumbnails you're going to be doing without anything that's easily recognizable as an object. So areas, movement, shapes, those kinds of things. You're not going to be drawing a specific thing. You're not going to be drawing a tear, for example. You're not going to be drawing an eye or a hand. What you're going to be doing is trying to communicate through texture, line, and shape the idea behind that emotion. And you're going to do 3 thumbnails for each of the 4 emotions that you've drawn and take a picture of those 12 images that you've made. And the next step is, the last step is, all of you have implements that you can use to make color images with. We've already used some from the palettes that you have, like with the Kente cloth and with the series of 2-color paintings you did with the continent of Asia and Japan that we worked with. You're going to use those 3 thumbnails for each of those emotions to make a separate painting for each of those 4 emotions. Again, staying away from anything specific that can be recognized, like a hand or an eyeball or a tear or different things like that, shapes like that. So the first step is having a list of 4 emotions. Second step is 3 thumbnails for each of those 4 emotions for a total of 12 thumbnails. Then the last step is use those thumbnails so that you make one painting for each of the 4 emotions in the list. And this painting should be in a 6-inch by 6-inch square. It's not any bigger than that. And then take a picture of those 4 paintings. Look at the parameters for grading as well and see what's in there. And then when it comes to peer review, it should be automatic and everything, and you should be assigned randomly other students in the class to look at their work. For each of the 3 peer reviews that you're supposed to do, what you'll need to do is only write one sentence, and that one sentence should address one of the 4 tools of artistic critique. That is, one sentence that can describe what you see. The next one, you can do one sentence that analyzes what you see. Then the third sentence could be one sentence that interprets what you see in another student's work. And then that's should be all you have to do. Let me know if that system works. It should be, like I said, it should be all automatic. If it's not working, if you can't find it, don't freak out. Let me know, and we'll either solve the problem, or if it's too big of a hassle, we'll drop it completely. But if it does show up as an option, please take advantage of that so you can get those points. And that's essentially it. So for that assignment, for the studio assignment, you'll turn in your list of emotions, your photo of your 12 thumbnails, and your photo of your 4 paintings, and then you'll write a sentence for each of the 3 people that the computer selects you to peer review. All right. If you have any questions or anything like that, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer them. Go through the whole module, see how you feel about it. Again, whether or not you think that abstraction is art, many other people do, and we're just exploring this as another facet of the different kinds of things that we're learning about art. right. Hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing and talking with you all next week.